As you prepare to take your test tomorrow, here are a few points that you might want to consider. The first and the foremost, make sure you attempt the test and give it your best. You would have received an email from the LSAC highlighting to you the general do's and don'ts for the exam. Make sure that you read this mail carefully. It contains the rules that you must follow to be able to take this test without any hassles. The LSAT India is an AI proctored test, and therefore any failure to comply with these rules could lead to a disqualification. This test has no negative marking, so leave no question unattempted. The LSAT India problems contain passages that could be based on a variety of topics, including science, art, literature, history, or even law. However, when you are solving these questions, make sure that you do not bring your own knowledge, the external knowledge that you have for these topics, into the problem solving process. Solve the question only based on the information that is given to you in the problem. Likewise, every statement that is given to you in an LSAT India problem has to be interpreted literally and treated as the truth. Do not let your prejudice determine your interpretation of what is given to you in the problems. Long sentences can sometimes be very intimidating. In such a scenario, break them down into smaller, comprehensible chunks. Here's an example of a paragraph from the first reading comprehension passage in the free official prep test. Let us focus on the first sentence. As you can see, the first sentence is quite long. Let us look at a method that we can use to comprehend this sentence by breaking it down into smaller pieces. I will now demonstrate this method to you, whereby we break the sentence into smaller parts, first delete out some parts and then add them back. I'd recommend that before you listen to me, you try it out yourself. First, have a look at these two commas. What lies in between it here is something that qualifies what is given before that. We can block this out. Moving ahead, you find commas here as well between this one and this one. It is telling you what something is called. Again, we can black this region out as well. There you go. Moving ahead. Now, have a look at what follows this comma and going up to the end of the sentence. It begins with the word notably. Now, what this implies is that it is telling you something notable about what has been said previously. It is giving you some additional information. Now, before we learn additional information, we want to know the main sentence. So let me just block this out for the time being. Oh, did we miss something? Have a look at the first line, the comma here and this comma here. What lies in between is basically telling you as to what the World Wide Web is. Well, let us black even this out. There you go. Now, read what you have before you. Right, so let's have a look at the sentence we have here. The World Wide Web raises legal issues about the rights of owners of intellectual property. Simple, is it not? Now, you've been able to understand this sentence, the main point of the sentence and the paragraph, and hence also the passage, because many times the first line and the first paragraph tells you a lot about the whole passage. Once you've understood the main point, it is possible for us to add back the details and make sense. Let's add them back one by one. The World Wide Web, a network of electronically produced and interconnected or linked sites. So it's telling you as to what the World Wide Web is. Let's add back something more. Oh, these linked sites are called pages. Alright. Let's add back something more. Oh, these are accessible via personal computer. Alright. And then we know that this raises legal issues about the rights of owners of intellectual property. Notably, those who create documents for inclusion on web pages. So it's focusing on the rights of owners, but particularly those owners who create documents for inclusion on web pages. So now we have been able to understand the whole thing. This is how you can comprehend any long sentence. As you practice this, it will get faster. Now here's a little suggestion of mine for the analytical reasoning questions. Remember that there are many ways to solve the question correctly, and several students do successfully solve it without using diagrams. However, my method involves first drawing the skeleton of the diagram in the 4D method. First, draw the diagram by drawing the skeleton. Next, enter the information that is given to you directly in the question into the diagram. The third stage is the most important. Remember here that on the basis of what is given to you directly in the diagram, you can derive or deduce some more additional information. Make sure you add that into the diagram. And only then should you decide the right answer by looking at the questions. Avoid jumping from stage 1 or stage 2 directly into the last stage. The intermediate stage in here, where you deduce additional information, will save you a lot of time and effort once you get to the questions. If you choose to draw diagrams for analytical reasoning questions, it would help for you to have pens, a pencil, and an eraser. Let me illustrate how. Let us say you have the setup for question 1 to 5. You can draw a diagram for this in pen. As you can see, this diagram codifies the rules that are given to you for the entire set of questions from question number 1 to 5. However, when you look at the individual questions, let's say for question number 1, there are some details that are specific to question number 1 that you might want to enter. For example, here, the last digit is 1. Now, you will need to erase this when you move on to the next question, because the same does not apply to question number 3. The requirement of question number 3 is that the third digit is not 0. So you need to know that this is not 0. So you should be able to erase anything that is given to you for the specific questions while retaining what is there as the common instructions for all questions in the setup. Therefore, use a pen to draw the main diagram, the master diagram, and use a pencil to enter the information that is given to you for the specific questions. Now, the logical reasoning sections of the LSAT India typically contain a passage. This passage might also be a conversation or any other form in which an argument may be presented to you. This is followed by a question, and then you have the options. Now, the options of the LSAT India are designed to be a little tricky. Therefore, when you read an option, it is likely to be quite enticing, and you might believe that every option is right, and therefore you're unable to find the right answer. To be able to overcome this problem, I suggest you to follow the 3P method. In this method, you first peruse the passage. So you only try to understand this passage. You do not read the question or the options. Once you've been able to understand the passage, go ahead and read the question. And then try to predict the answer, which means that you do not treat the question as an MCQ. You do not treat it as a multiple choice question. Try to predict the answer as if there were no options. Once you are able to predict the answer, now you look at the options only to pick the one that matches your prediction. Use the options as a set of options from which you can pick what you thought of. Do not read the options, because that might make things difficult for you. Problems on logical reasoning generally test you on your ability to understand the structure of an argument. Typically, an argument consists of a premise or premises based upon which a conclusion is drawn. Now, the reason that I have assumption written here in the lighter tone is because assumptions are like a premise that are not given to you in the passage as such. That is why they're assumed. Questions on logical reasoning require you to identify and understand premises, assumptions, and conclusions. As I just said, assumptions are not given to you in the passage, but there are some words that could help you identify premises and conclusions. Since conclusion is, well, a conclusion, you can identify that through words such as so, therefore, thus. A premise acts as the basis of the conclusion, and therefore you could identify that by words such as because, since, and other like words. We saw a little while back as to how we could deal with long sentences, but how do you deal with long reading comprehension passages? Well, for that, go paragraph by paragraph and ensure that you have been able to comprehend one paragraph before you advance to the next. So we just learned that for the RC, we proceed paragraph by paragraph. But how do you check whether you've been able to comprehend a paragraph or not? Here's a little test. Whenever you've been able to understand something, when you've been able to comprehend something, you'd have the ability to summarize that and also to anticipate what follows next. So, for example, if you have been able to comprehend the first paragraph, at the end of it, you'd be able to summarize it into one or two simple sentences. The second thing that you'd have is the ability to anticipate as to what lies next. You may not be right with your anticipation, which means that you might anticipate something and it might turn out to be something else. But you will have an ability to anticipate what comes next. That is how you know that you have been able to comprehend. So, in case you are unable to comprehend something, you might want to consider rereading it until you have achieved this amount of comprehension. Now here's a quick tip for reading comprehension that could help you identify structure. In many comprehension passages, you will find two perspectives over a debate, over a topic. And then you'd find that there's also the opinion of the author. Questions will generally test you on your ability to understand as to what the issue is, to understand as to what the two perspectives are, and as to what the author's opinion is. Generally, the author sides with one of the two perspectives. Sometimes he might even take a third. Let me give you a little reminder. Your eyes can see a lot more than you think, and your mind is a lot sharper than you might think it is. Therefore, when you quickly skim through a passage and the questions, you can gather a lot more than you think. By investing just a few seconds, maybe 20 seconds, you can know as to what the contents of the passage as well as the questions are. You can then attempt the question a lot more prepared because you're now familiar with the contents of the entire passage and the questions. Here's a little tip that could help you with eliminating wrong answers. Now, unless the passage itself contains it, generally options that use very extreme words are not correct. Another trick for eliminating options, particularly in questions that test you on the main conclusion or the main point of a passage. If the option is too narrow, which means it focuses on only one or two points from the passage, generally one such option is wrong. Well, we've spoken about long sentences, but what about difficult words? Words that test your vocabulary. What do you do if you find a word that you don't understand? In most cases, you do not need to know the meaning of the word because you can infer the meaning by looking at the context, and that should be good enough for you to get the answer right. Apart from difficult questions, you might also find some difficult nouns in the exam. For example, some names that you're not culturally familiar with. Don't mind them. You'd find that in most cases, the first alphabet of these nouns are distinct, which means that you can just replace that name by the first alphabet and proceed with solving the question. If you've not already attempted the free Law Prep SM, do that immediately. It will help you get familiar with the online test interface. In every section of the LSAT India, you have over 20 questions to solve in 35 minutes. Therefore, do not waste precious time on a question that you find difficult. Instead, invest it smartly on those problems that you think you can go ahead and actually solve. As a challenging test that requires your focus and attention for almost 3 hours, ensure that you are properly nourished and rested when you take the test. Finally, and most importantly, stay calm, collected and composed when you're giving the test. Remember that a positive frame of mind will help you give it your best.